I'm wondering, while we just get around to getting started, I was wondering, did anybody do a little practice with observing breathing?
Yeah, I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Successfully?
Very successful.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Tell us your secret.
Exactly how you said it. Just practice it. Watch people's breath. I could even do it from a distance, from say a good 10 metres away, without even knowing the person. And then if I smile, they smile.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific. Are you the only one? Nobody else practiced it?
I did, but not like visually. Because I worked on the phone most of the day. Just like close my eyes and try and hear them breathing on the phone. Just try and match that over the phone.
Okay.
I don't know how successful it was. I couldn't see any.
No, but you couldn't see the other end, no. But it's a really good attitude. I don't know whether anybody has seen a book called the NLP Phone Book. It's only a very thin book, but there is some really dynamic techniques for phone use. I make a practice myself of standing to make a phone call. Your voice comes differently. Your physiology affects all those elements that we talked about last week. So there's some good things like that. We have an experience here that you're going to share with us.
Oh, I had a situation yesterday where I was discussing with the client. I'm a marketing consultant, and I was actually helping somebody with this sales process, which had an unusual narrowing in the funnel in a particular place that I didn't think it should have it. And I was trying to identify what was going on in the sales conversation to cause this particular series of objections at this point in the sales process. And I figured I had it when I asked him a question, and his bottom lip disappeared behind his teeth and his top lip. Like that.
And that trembled with it.
Yeah. And the next three questions I asked him got the same result. So then I said, listen, I've got an idea I want to share with you. What would happen if your salespeople did this at that stage, and the whole physiology and body language changed? And he was very receptive to the suggestion.
Good. Good.
Yeah, it was really quite spectacular, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty nice, isn't it, to have a practice on, even if it's a new skill, but just to practice it and see. If I read you, I looked it up after last week, but I forgot to bring it with me. But Laborde, Jeannie Laborde, whom I mentioned last week, she has an exercise. She calls her, or she talks about the technique as a Picasso technique because of the observation of skin tone and skin change, but also the lip. And she has her students do lip study, lower lip study, 20 subjects they have to do, and expect honesty, because it's about yourself anyway, and not move on to the face colour exercises she has until you've got the lower lip one done. And that's really, that's a nice account that we've been given there of that, just to practice. And what it really means is when we become aware of things, we become more observant. There's a great story told of Milton Erickson, who's one of the seminal figures behind the modelling that NLP is. And he was doing his rounds. He was a medical doctor, psychiatrist, and a medical doctor, and he was doing his rounds in the hospital. And he had 3 or 4 students with him, and they came to this bed, and he said, I wonder if you could just share with me, this is to the students, some observations that you can make about this patient. Well, of course, they wanted to go and get the chart off the end of the bed, but he wouldn't let them do that. He said, no, he said, I just want you to observe and then tell me what you observe. And they ended up embarrassed and looking at one another and not really having an answer for it. And he said, you can't tell me anything. And they described a couple of things that were obvious. And he said, well, right, you stay here. I'll complete my rounds. And when I come back, he said, I want you to tell me what you've observed. And so he did his rounds, finally came back. Hello, Mark. Oh, there's a seat there. And he came back and asked the students, well, what you observed? And they were not able to tell him. And he simply walked halfway down the bed and patted the middle of the bed because the woman was a double amputee and they'd failed to observe the outline of her legs there. And he said there are three things that you must learn. You must learn to observe. You must learn to observe. You must learn to observe. Observation makes such an extraordinary difference to your interaction, as we talked about rapport last week. That ability to see, you might be able to see it down there, I've written right at the bottom, minimal cues. That's what you were describing, a minimal cue. And that's what we're looking for. And you can still give complete attention to the person you're with and still be a good observer. I think we talked about the fellow with the dog grooming. You know, just that stimulated my interest, and I was watching a couple of these politicians on the 7:30 report this week, and turning the sound off and watching some of the interaction over this business with the Utegate business, and it was just remarkable. Except that Tony Abbott, he is capable of telling the most extraordinary spins and keeping his face dead set. So what have I got to do when I run into something like that? Because there's clients like that. Then you're looking elsewhere for those minimal cues.
Last night on SBS there was a final of a series about John Howard, and an interesting thing which was really evident last night, the symmetry of his face distorts remarkably when the buttons are pressed. His right eye narrows and his face distorts. Then it comes back, depending on what he's being questioned on. And I've observed it over a number of years, but it's become, maybe I'm more attuned to it, but yeah, he's a great person to study in terms of that, because it's quite noticeable.
And the nice thing about what you're talking about is that palette of colour, of shape, and of information via these minimal cues is available from every client. Every client is offering you information. Let me just make another reference to Milton Erickson. As his students, and nominally the most favoured student was Ernest Rossi, who's a scientist in his own right. But when they put together some idea of how Erickson worked, they called the overriding or the overarching process the utilisation process. The utilisation. Now, what that simply meant was this, that Erickson was using whatever the client brought to him. There's a famous story told about a doctor who came to him for hypnosis and was somewhat antagonistic to him. He wasn't a real popular man, Milton Erickson, because he did extraordinary things, and some people thought that, you know, there was a bit of a sham about them because they felt they couldn't do those things. So he wasn't a man that easily engaged everybody. And this doctor came to him, and Erickson was aware of this attitude. It was shown very, very clearly by the way the doctor came into his rooms, the way he sat down. And he let him sit down, and he said, oh look, he said, I didn't want you to sit in that chair. He said, I wondered if you would sit in that chair over there. That's not very comfortable. And the doctor, of course, agreed with him. Yes, he said, it's a very uncomfortable chair, and moved to the other chair. They were identical chairs, but he moved to the chair. And then Erickson offered him a decision about the light. He said, is that light worrying you there? Would you like me to do something? He said, that's very annoying to have that light shining right over my head like that. So Erickson doused the light and then made an apology for the books that were scattered out of his bookshelf lying on the floor. And the doctor gave him a bit of a serve about that. He was surprised he was so untidy when he knew that he was having the public into his rooms. And Erickson said afterwards that what he was doing was letting that man discharge his resistance about things that didn't matter. See, he came for therapy. So we let him discharge all his resistance on the lights, the chair, the books that fell out of the bookshelf, and the rest of it. We need to be, I think it says it in the Bible, as subtle as a dove, or as gentle as a dove rather, and as subtle as a snake. That's a terrible analogy, but there are those two characteristics there. You need to be observing. You need to be able to see what's going on with your client. So, I've written there, minimal cues. I wanted to start very briefly tonight, just to set a scene with this communication model here. Because if you've done, and I've done hundreds of family counselling work. I've done hundreds of relationship counselling work. And you invariably hear, and I'm sure that you've heard statements like this, where one party says, I said so-and-so, and the other party will say, no, you didn't. And neither are lying, but one's hearing something different to the communication that's offered. And I just wanted to start with this idea here, that we have an external event or a communication, and sooner or later our client is going to have an internal representation. Their state of being will be one way or another. The physiology will change because of the communication. But that communication arrives there after it passes through all these filters. And I say to my clients when they've come and I ask them, have you ever been hypnotised before? And they'll say no. Well, if they say no, they say no. And I will then begin to talk to them, but some point along the line I will say to them, you know, we've been talking about the conscious and the unconscious. At the moment, you and I are conscious minds to conscious mind. So our minds are interacting. I said to a fellow the other day, well, if I said to you that I hope that you'd had a glass of milk and a banana before you came this morning because it was useless coming to be hypnotised if you hadn't had a glass of milk and a banana, what would you think? Well, you know, he realised that was ridiculous. But that's a very strained example of what goes on as information is filtered through the minds of the person to whom you're speaking. Distortions, beliefs, deletions, doesn't fit the person's experience, so they either reject it or delete it. We've got to deal with their values, which are different to yours or mine. They will have made generalisations, like we all do, about certain universal events, or singular events rather, and we'll make them universal in application. And then there are decisions that they make, and there are memories. So, like you said last week, it is no wonder that sometimes communication is like Chinese whispers. So it goes through all this process of deletion. I worked with a guy who came to see me. He thought I was a counsellor only, and he rushed in and told me that he had a $1 million deal in London, and he said a friend of mine that you saw some years ago, this friend of mine told me that you could help me. He said, I have to get to London by the end of this week. But he said, I can't fly. I've got a phobia for flying. He said, when my travel documents came to the office and they came through my fax, he said, I went all weak in the knees and had to sit down just at the thought of flying. He said, so can you help me? And I said, yes, I can help you. And because the friend that had sent him, I'd helped with a phobia for flying. And I said, I think the best thing we could do would be to use hypnosis. Well, immediately he stiffened. Hypnosis, he said. Oh, he said, they wouldn't like that. I said, who are they? And he said, the church elders. He said, they wouldn't have that. Now, I said hypnosis. Which I suppose is apt to say only God knows what's going on in his head. But obviously what I said, using hypnosis and the descriptive terms, came through here totally differently. So I said, well, you have a problem, don't you? Because that's what I do. And I said, that's what I can do with you to enable you to fly to London at the end of this week. Oh, he said, I don't know. He said, and then he told me he'd just been born again and gave me a whole history about his experience, and he knew this. The church thought hypnosis was demonic and stuff from the Middle Ages, but that's his beliefs. That's where he was. And I said, well, look, first of all, tell me what you think hypnosis is. Well, he said, you put me to sleep. Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. What else will happen? He said, I'll become unconscious. I said, what will happen then? He said, you will put some things into my brain. I said, okay, well, that's interesting. Let's stop there. I said, do you sleep with your eyes open or closed? Oh, he said, I sleep with my eyes closed, like everybody does. I said, well, what if, I don't want you to believe me when I tell you that hypnosis is not sleep, but what if I hypnotised you and you had your eyes open all the time, so you'd know what was going on? Well, he didn't give me an answer to that. I said, if you're unconscious, how much do you think you're going to take in? So we don't want you unconscious. Ah, right. And I said, can you tell me how I'm going to put something in your brain? No, he couldn't tell me that. Well, I said, look, you have a problem. I said, that's what I do. If you want to go home, I said, I will keep one appointment time for you tomorrow. If you ring me up in the morning, you can have an appointment in the afternoon, and I promise you, I will never say sleep. I will never ask you to shut your eyes. I said, and you will not be unconscious because you'll be talking to me some of the time. Will that be okay? Well, he said, I'll think about it. And I knew what he was going to do. He was going to bring the elders up and find out if it was okay. So I don't know whether he ever did that or not, but he rang next day and took the appointment. Now, I had one up on him that he didn't know, that for 22 years I was a minister of religion. And so I knew a fair bit about what he would be thinking and what he would be believing and expecting. And so I started off and induced a hypnotic state. And of course, the first thing he must do, goes like this, his eyes closed. I said, George, open your eyes. The eyes came open like that. And I said, our agreement is that you will not close your eyes. So away we went and so on. I did some anchoring with him, and we used the best experience he'd had, you see. And being a new convert to Christianity, he told me that he'd been baptised by immersion just about 4 or 5 months previously. And so I accepted that. That was a really nice experience for him. And I started to talk to him while he was hypnotised about how liberating that was to him, and this new life that he found for himself in this way. And I wasn't being hypocritical. This was his belief. And so I was happy to support that in the work that we did. And I asked him to, while he was there, just to rehearse that baptismal experience. And I don't have much of a voice, but I sang a little song that I knew that because he was a Baptist, I knew that they would sing this song. And so I just sort of hummed it in a few words while he was doing this inner representation and rehearsal of his baptismal experience. So we wound the whole thing up. I'd had to admonish him about half a dozen times about closing his eyes, and kept him all the way through with his eyes open, and brought him out of trance. And I said, how did that feel? He said, well, it felt wonderful. He thought it felt just like the sort of feeling he'd had when he was baptised. And I said, well, that's great. I said, well, what you need to do now is get to London and do your deal. And I think that was, saw me on the Monday, I think it was on the Tuesday, and he flew out on the Friday, did his deal, came back and gave a glowing endorsement of what had occurred. Hypnosis was the word I used and descriptions around that. But over here, he makes an interpretation out of what his beliefs were about it. Now, you are faced with that all the time, aren't you? All the time. I heard Glenn say last week about vagueness in conversation. I wanted to add another word to that, and I didn't do it.
Feel free.
Well, I'm about to do it. I'm about to do it. If you're going to use vague language, it needs to be artfully vague. Artfully vague. So you don't lose sight of what your intention is. But if you can delete as much content from your communication and still make sense, then you remove the possibility of mistranslation or misinterpretation. See, a guy comes along and he said, look, I need to see you, I need some help with anger management. Okay. Well, we talked for a little bit, and there's a lot of other stuff there. That it's not just anger management, there's all the connections to that. So my language then might go something like this. We've got no Geralds here? Okay, I've used the word Gerald. Let's say his name's Gerald. Gerald, I was really interested in what you told me a little while ago. And I realised that if I were confronted with that difficulty, I would feel just like you felt. But there's one thing that we know, Gerald, that you know more than you actually know that you know. And we're going to invite resources that you've forgotten about, experiences and memories that you've just let slip away. We're going to invite all of that back as recall for a way to use those resources to deal with these difficulties. Now, I could have been talking about gout. I could have been talking about consumption. I could have been talking about, what I did was let the client give meaning to the words. So if you are clear about your intent and you are skillful in the selection or deletion of content, you can still have an effective communication. I don't think I need to say anything more about that, but I wondered if you've got any questions at all that you want to ask before we move on. It's really, that's what the map's not the territory's all about. See? There's whole lots of sayings, you know. The communication is what is received. You know, if you may mean to say something good to a person, but if your words are poorly chosen and they may have some other agenda going, then that can be misinterpreted and not be received as a kind or good or loving communication. So it's what they get. The communication that's got, that actually is the communication. Not what I think it was, but what the person receives it as. Well, tonight, I wanted to lay that as a foundation, but I wanted to talk about outcomes. I think that that's basically what most of us, in whatever line of business we are, need to be clear about outcomes. But I want to come back closer to you, to me, because I need to be clear about my outcomes. I need to be clear about the outcome that I desire. If you don't have a plan, it'll be the same as getting your car out there tonight after this is over and driving off to wherever you're going without headlights. You can't see where you're going because the lights aren't on. Without a goal, without a plan, without a clarity about outcome, then you are nowhere. I want you to come down here and look down here at the beliefs and the outcomes. We'll come to that, but I want you to have that in mind, because this is what it really amounts to. It is what you believe about yourself, about your worthiness. I can remember a client whom I asked, can you say that you love yourself? Couldn't bring herself to say it. I modified it. I said, can you say that you accept yourself? Couldn't do it. The reason that she couldn't say she loved herself prevented her from being able to say she accepted herself. So I'm going to introduce elements of personal development, personal worthiness, personal growth. Because if you're right with yourself, you'll be right with your clients. You'll project what you wish to project, which is yourself. I think as Oscar Wilde said, for God's sake, be yourself. All the other selves are taken. It's the truth. You are unique. Now, how many times is that said in a derogatory manner? You're unique. Thank God I am. There is nobody else like me. There's nobody else like you. And the human desire surely is to achieve whatever potential there is possible to you. To achieve that requires a recognition that you're very much the centre of it all. So let's have a look at some outcomes. Well, a couple of things that I want to say. You didn't ask me any questions, and I really want you to be clear about those filters. Nobody's disagreeing with the fact that they're there. Okay. Everybody.
Can you talk about, if you may, because this was something that I was really interested in when I first learned about this stuff. I suppose the difference between, say, a deletion, distortions, generalisations, and how some things are just gone. You know, it may be there, but your beliefs have overwhelming. You know, it just says, well, that's not part of my world. You know, so the differences, I guess, between a deletion and distortion, a deletion and a distortion, and a generalisation, and I suppose, you know, some of those things and how they may be different from each other, because some of them may seem the same or similar.
They overlap. They do overlap. I mean, a deletion is normally comes about when a person simply cannot accommodate that idea that's been offered. They can't accommodate it because it's not part of their experience, and they may, in a sense, delete by thinking, well, I'll put that on the back burner. And but a distortion really requires a big shift and an application of whatever reality that person has about those issues. It's like a substitution, because that can't be accommodated. I personally am not, in a sense, a creationist, for argument's sake. Let's say that. I accept and believe very clearly in evolution. I said to a friend of mine at Christmas time, because of something he said, I said, oh, you believe in creationism? And he said, what else could you believe? Like that, you see. What else could you believe? Now, the world's full of people who believe like I do, as there's a lot of people who believe like he does. but he wasn't willing to accommodate that belief could sit there and be real for a person. So what he has to do is to distort. I don't want to tread anybody's toes here because you make believe. But you know, you've got to do a fair bit of distortion, forgive me, if I say that to accept that the world was made in 7 days and it only happened about 5 or 6, 7,000 years ago, I think that you've got to do a hell of a lot of distortions to make that fit. But that's not our concern. Our concern is that how people will distort little things to fit their worldview. So that's obviously got to impinge on their values. It's got to impinge on their beliefs. And of course, distortions, deletions, values and beliefs will all occur before decisions are made. And so if I come back to, we're not out, well, I don't know what you are, but I'm not out to change the world, but what I am out to do is to communicate effectively with people. So I come back to my statement about artfully vague, about being clear in my communication intent, but understanding that if I can delete unnecessary content, then I leave the client with a greater scope of interacting with what they think I have said.
Can you give us an example?
I thought I did. Remember I was talking about, you know, the guy with anger management? And I said, I recognise that you have a certain difficulty, so.
Yes. Maybe an example of the structure you use for...
Let me finish this one first.
Yeah.
And I go back to something I was just about to say, and that might clarify it too. It's important that when the client speaks to me, the client believes that I understand what he says or she says. But it's pretty stupid if I have that attitude. See? Because what people say then has to be balanced off against these filters, one way or another, whether it's going in or coming out, that's got to be balanced off against that. So therefore, I think that whether you're an estate agent or a hypnotherapist or a counsellor or whatever you are, I believe that there's a great benefit in having what I call a select language, a careful way of speaking, a careful way of delivering the meaning that I wish to attach, or wish attached. Does it say that for you? That I wish attached to the communication that I've given. What was your question?
I was saying, do you have any sort of structure for how you do that? If you, I don't know, can maybe write it down or something in a way without using words, like you do this and this and this sort of thing to get to that result.
Why don't you help me with that? That would be helpful.
I was going to say with Stephen's, an example that I might use to delete content, let's say in your industry, you know, in our industry.
Yeah.
There'd be certain things that you want in the ideal real estate agent. There'd be certain things that are important to you. And of course, you may have heard some things about other real estate agents that you're not quite interested in. So I don't know what those things are for you, but notice when I've talked about the things that you're interested in, I don't know what they are, but I've motioned them in. And then when there's other things that other agents might do, you know, that might not be for you, we've got to minimise those. Notice these and those. Yeah. When I say these, that's all about these things that you like, those things. It's implying good things, these, bad thing, those. I don't mean to point to David, but you know what I'm saying. So, those sorts of vagueness where the client adds the content.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah. Yours does too.
Who spoke? Oh, you spoke, did you say? All right, well, I just see that is such a seminal thing for us to understand these elements of communication. You know, it's not enough to just say, well, he said, or she said. It's what's meant by the he or the she. Okay, so let's move on then to outcomes, the thinking about it, and structuring the outcome. If I asked you privately, let's say one-on-one, what do you want? What do you want? You don't have to answer me, but just think about it. Let's imagine that I'm able to say to each one of you, in a private setting, what do you want? And then you told me, and I were able to say to you, carefully, and what have you got now that isn't part of what you said you wanted? So if we take those two elements, what are we moving towards? We are moving towards an outcome of some sort. So let me come back to that question. I'm posing it to you, and you can, in your own privacy, deal with it. But what do you want? Some people might think that, I don't know how many listings it'd be a bonus, but that's not really what I'm talking about. Before the listings, before the sale, what do you want? And we're talking about the here and now. You'll see down there I've got hugs. That's huge, unbelievable goals. We'll deal with that in a minute. But I'm not talking about that right at this moment. You know, I knew when I was in theological college, my great ambition was to have a church, a nice big church, and be respected and do good work and so on and so on. But that was out of my head at that time, and that was out there, but wasn't in here. And so what I'm really asking you when I ask you, what do you want? It's about the you that's you. Okay. If I asked that question and you were honest with me, and you told me something or other, and I said to you, well, you don't have it now? And you might say, no, I don't. Well, because I asked you to ask yourself, what do you want? I hope that somewhere in your heads there's some kind of something just shimmering away there that's an image or an idea about what it is that you want. So how are we going to get what we want? Because when we talk about outcomes, we're talking about a state now that doesn't possess the qualities of that outcome that we want. So how do we get there? Do you possess resources? Do you possess capabilities? Pardon me, I have to refer to the work that I do for examples. I don't sell houses, so you have to bear with me. But when, well, we can go to the example I used last week of the woman who had the phobia, and so her outcome was to be free of that phobia. Her husband had to travel overseas without her. She simply couldn't fly. Her claustrophobia was such that it dominated a lot of parts of her life, and she said on camera that it's now affecting my 2 children. So she said, I want to be free of that. That was the outcome. So how do we get from where she is to that desire or that outcome that she had? We have to find something within her. That's what you've got to do. You have to find something within yourself, some resource within yourself. And for her, I asked her, was there a time in your life when by your standards what you did was excellent? And is it possible that other people endorsed what you'd done? She said yes. I said, can we catch that feeling again? And so I asked her just to close her eyes. I wasn't hypnotising her. I just said, just close your eyes and just imagine it. Bring it up again. And I asked her to fill in, if you know what submodalities mean, I asked her to fill in the elements of the image that she pulled up in her mind. The lighting that was there, the sound of the voices, the stove and the cooking sounds, the smells, and she pulled it all up there, and she has this beautiful smile on her face, whereas less than 5 minutes before she'd been crying. And she has this beautiful smile on her face, and I reached over and squeezed her shoulder and anchored it. Nothing smart on my part. She had those resources. You might say to yourself, well, what's that got to do with a phobia? Well, if she has an outcome, the only way she's going to get from where she is to experiencing that outcome is somehow or other to employ something that she possesses as a quality, as a resource, and transfer that to stepping into an elevator or stepping onto an aeroplane and so on. So, she, I think I told you, she said I could smell the chicken. So that's how much of the experience she'd revived of it. And so we finished that, anchored it, asked her to open her eyes, and I said to her after a little conversation, it was a really nice experience and so on, I said, you're going to feel this just one more time. But I said, will you just allow yourself to feel the same uncomfortable, unpleasant feelings that you feel when you step into an elevator or when you contemplate getting on an aeroplane? Would you let yourself feel that one more time? And immediately her face changed. It was very easy to see. I'm going to use you as my model. And as soon as I saw her face change, and I thought that was the peak of her recall of that experience, I reached over and squeezed her shoulder. Immediately a big smile came on her face, and within 2 weeks she was travelling up and down elevators. She's flown overseas several times now. The head of yellow cab, same kind of thing. The connection between what you want can be really bad if you start trying to problem solve. Yeah, that's what people do. They have an outcome that they want. They know what they want, but they think, oh, what problem? And then they'll start to rehearse all the failures they've had, and then they'll try and cognitively work their way around to deal with the situation, when inside you, inside me, are resources that aren't tapped. If I said to any person in this room, I wouldn't be wrong if I said to you, you've handled some difficult things in your life before today, haven't you? That's right. And if I said it to you, and to you, and to you, you'd all say yes. How did you do that? How did you handle that thing? That's what I mean by a resource. It's not some fancy trick that somebody teaches you. It's not some great feat of learning and memory or anything like that. It is the qualities of experience that you have and that has enabled you to be a survivor. I'm looking at a room full of ingenious survivors. You are. You are ingenious survivors. And all of you possess extraordinary resources to achieve your outcome. So, if I say to you, let's put problem solving away, because whether you're a hypnotist or a real estate agent or a marketer or whatever, it is all about unconscious processes. Unconscious processes. If you don't want to be fancy and use that term, it's about things you've forgotten. It's about qualities that you have. It's about memories of successes that you've either dismissed or allowed to fade away and not be available to you easily. By setting an outcome, we become aware of the difference between what we have and what we want. And that makes sense to me. Does it to you? By setting an outcome, I'm actually creating an awareness about what we have and what we want. I did a lot of work. I lived on an Aboriginal shanty town for about 2 years of my young life after I came out of the church, out of the college rather, and I had out the back of Leeton in the bad old days when there were corrugated iron humpies on the outskirts of the town, mostly next to the garbage dump, and I lived there for a period of time and with these folk. And one of the things that I learned was that it doesn't really matter where you are in the social scale. The aspirations may be expressed in different ways, but they're just there. They're absolutely there, whoever and wherever you might happen to be. And so, if I can get you to kind of trim it right back down and not see it as you having the outcome of being the top salesperson or whatever, just coming back a little bit from that first and getting the clarity of yourself. Okay. You see, desperation will sometimes cause us to extend our strengths and our abilities, but there's always got to be a good foundation. I'm not going to ask you to put your hand up because that would be mean, but I'm going to ask you another question that you will answer inside yourself. In relation to outcomes, could you put your finger on the problem that's holding you back? Don't nod, don't do anything, and you may be a room half full of angels, and you don't have that. But just be honest with yourself about this situation, and let me say this to you, that if there exists a problem, it cannot be solved without you set an outcome. It cannot be solved. Over the years, I worked out that I've hypnotised about 30,000 people. Over the years, I have been astonished, and I oughtn't have been, but I've been astonished by the people who have a problem, who want to solve it, who go about it a particular way and it doesn't work, but they do it all over again. And they do it all over again. And they do it all over again. And again and again and again. They tell me that a rat, a laboratory rat, takes just an hour or so to work out which is the right channel to go down to get the cheese. Humans don't seem to be that smart. So, if I say that, if there's a problem exists there, then you have to have an outcome to deal with that problem. Change is a journey from an unpleasant present state towards a desired state. And the desired state ought to be your outcome. I don't want to talk too minimally, because outcome is a word, but if we understand that your desire to move from here to there, that represents an outcome. If that's your desire to move from where you're at to some place, and some people will set the bar this high, and some will set it this high, and some will set it this high. You say, but that's part of your learning experience, my learning experience in life, to do that. So I'll give you a little formula. If we say on the left hand we've got the present state, and on the right hand the desired state, and this is where I am at this moment, and this is where I want to be, straining, thinking real hard, mulling over the problem, trying to solve the problem, doesn't get the job done. Whatever resources you possess, that's what's going to get the job done. So what are you? Are you a person who hangs in there? Are you a person who is punctual? Or are you a person that's unpunctual? Are you a person who attends quickly to your prospects? Or you're a little bit frightened and you put them off, and you put them off because you don't want to pick the phone up, or you don't want to make the call. Only you know. Only you know. But if you identify what the present state is, then it becomes easier to find some resource that can deal with that. People do funny things. There was I was travelling to Gladstone, and somebody had telephoned from Cooktown wanting to see me. We had a clinic on the Sunshine Coast as well, in Nambour. Anyway, the Nambour office got a message to me as I was travelling towards Gladstone. I was going to run a seminar in Bundaberg for a few days, and this person desperately wanted to see me because somebody referred them, and I said, well, the only way you could see me and I could see you was we could meet in Gladstone, since you're on your way to Sydney, and tell me what it's about. And the lady, and this is why I say people do funny things, this lady was in the Navy in officer training and terrified of water, and
why the hell would you tell me?
It's pretty crazy. And she, as part of her officer training, she had to go off some craft into the water in full flotation gear and whatever, I don't know what else it was. And I didn't really think that we'd coincide. I thought, that's a long shot. Cooktown, she's got to coincide for this. I think I was only going to be in Gladstone for 2 days or something like this, so I didn't think it was going to happen. But it happened. And so she presents a lovely young person. And she said to me, told me her story about how terrified she was, and how her mother was always telling them when they were kids, they were growing up, don't go in the water, don't go in the water, don't go too far in. And she said, and I heard this all my childhood. She said, that's what I think. That's what I think's wrong. How can I change that? Because that's my history. How can I change that? And I said to her, tell me about yourself. What is it about you that when you think about it, you feel really great about yourself? And she said, oh, I don't know. And probed and asked different questions. And no, it wasn't getting anywhere. She said, oh, I'm just an ordinary person, and a bit shy, and blah, blah. And like this, you see, and anyway, a partner was sitting in the room with her, and he said, tell him about the ice skating. Like this, you see. And so it turned out that this young woman was, she didn't get into the Olympics, but she was on the squad for a period of time, that she'd been the champion of Tasmania, the champion of Victoria, at that age, which was about 18, or what it was she was at that time. I said, doesn't that make you feel great when you think about that? I said, have you got any ribbons or, you know, trophies or anything like this? Oh yes, they had ribbons and trophies, and so I got her to describe this, I think it was Miss Victoria or something, the ice skating, and I got her to describe all this, and she really got into it in the end, and you know, she was smiling and what have you, and I anchored that, they said, and I just touched it. What I was doing was pairing an emotion with touch, so we had access to it easily. Why do you think that when we're wanting to be friendly with people, sometimes we don't have words, we just might give their arm a squeeze or touch people like that? It's a basic human trait. And these two smart fellas, Grinder and Vandler, saw that you could use that and you could pair it up with emotions. And this young lady smiled, and then I got her to imagine herself rolling off this craft, whatever it would be, into the water, and you know, she was really uncomfortable. And so we anchored that. And so we had two emotional responses. And then we sat talking for a little bit, and I asked her, I say this to people, I said, you know, this is not nice, but it's the last time you have to feel it. Just let yourself go back into that imagined experience, that fantasised experience of going off the boat in full gear and into the water. And at the same time she did that, I touched both, I think it was her hands, touched both her hands, and what NLP calls collapsed the anchors. It's like bringing two live wires together and causing a short circuit. And it was quite extraordinary. In that exact moment, she had a spontaneous regression and remembered. She remembered a baby, is how she described it. She said, I just saw a baby, and all covered with sun cream. And my dad picked this baby up, and the baby slipped out of his hands and fell into the swimming pool. Oh, she said, I think that baby's me. So that wasn't the cure, but it was just coincidental, I suppose one would say, that that memory was refreshed at that particular time. But the woman went on and successfully ended her officer's training. See, so why I'm telling you that is I'm saying that even if you don't think you've got resources, you've got them. Even if you don't think your clients have got resources, you've got them and they've got them. And it's a matter of eliciting that. Now, I'm not going to pretend to try and tell you how to sell, but I am laying down some foundations. My friend here is going to do the micro stuff this evening. I'm just laying down some foundations for you to understand that it's possible to, and I love this word, elicit, draw out, get from either yourself or a client resources that will be useful in closing a sale, in achieving whatever outcome you've created for yourself. Do you know what I believe? I believe that one of the best beliefs that a person can have is this: and I know it's not true, but I still believe it. I believe I can do anything. I think that's a useful belief. I don't have any trouble about the fact that I have to put that rider on just for your sake. I don't tell myself that, but for your sake, I will put the rider on and say, well, I know it's not true. But we all have potentials that are unrealised. Every one of us. We have potentials that are unrealised. When a person's in good deep hypnosis, it's lovely to say to them, you know, you don't know all your possibilities yet. What a wonderful word that yet is. You don't know what all your possibilities are yet. You're implying, what a wonderful mode of communication implication is. You are implying that they have the capacity to realise their potentials, their possibilities. So, outcomes. Let me talk about thinking that's involved in an outcome. There is two aspects of it. There's outcome thinking, that is deciding what you want in a given situation. And the second element of it is to then make your life as congruent as you can, your environment as congruent as you can, so that the outcome and your orientation meshes. If you don't like selling houses, go and do something else. See the elements of it. If you don't like being a hypnotist, go and do something else. Because the basic, fundamental part of it is the you that's you, the me that's me. And however I express that, doesn't matter where it is. When I was working amongst those Aboriginal folk, they were the ones that had to pay me. So I had a little family. Sometimes I'd get a bag of onions. Sometimes it was a real big day, or big week, if I got 10 shillings. I'm talking about a long while ago, some of you weren't even born. It was a real big deal, that. And we were going to have another child, and didn't have any money, and I knew that my belief was that I was called to be a preacher, but I also had to put food on the table. So I went across to Albury and went into a big radio and electrical retailer there, and saw if I could get a job for a few weeks. And no, they didn't want any people. And I said to them, have you got any stock that you can't sell? And yes, they had some stock they couldn't sell. They had a radiogram, they had an old Simpson Ringer model washing machine, there was a vacuum cleaner, there was a Sunbeam Mixmaster, and there was a refrigerator. And old Mick Raber Refrigeration, said to me, if you can sell that, you've got a job. I'm in a strange town. So I made a few inquiries, and I found out that there was a town called, forgotten the name of it now. Anyway, it's on the Kiewa Valley Highway. You went through Wodonga, Kiewa Valley, and it was being flooded. They were extending the Hume Weir. This town was going, Talangata, and this town was going to be flooded, and everybody was being moved to another town up higher, up above. And I thought, well, those people have got to want some appliances. They've got to want some appliances. So off I went in their ute, and to Talangata, to the new Talangata, and just went knocking on doors. And at the end of the day, I'd sold all the appliances off the back of that ute. And I got myself a job on commission and a retainer for as long as I wanted to stay there, which wasn't very long, just a few weeks, just to get some money together. But, you know, I didn't see myself as, oh, unfortunate, I can't be carrying out my ministry. I didn't see myself as a star salesman. I just saw myself as myself. And there was a need, and I knew that the very resources that enabled me to do any other of the things I had done in my life, they could be applied here as well. So I'm saying to you that if you know what your outcome is, if you know what you want, let's call it that. Let's not call it outcome. If you know what you want, then you can get what you want. Because you're sitting in the very resources at this moment that will get you what you want. That's the beauty of all of this. You don't have to go off and do a course. You don't have to go to university. You are enough already. Just so long as you know what you want. Person that doesn't know what they want, highly unlikely they're going to get it. All right. Let's have a look. Oh, I didn't know what's up here. What a windbag. I'm really sorry. I had no idea it was that time. Well, look, I just want to round this out. I know that Glenn is going to be doing a lot of the micro stuff associated with this, so I'll have just, if you bear with me, just take the headings. I've got written down here, problem thinking makes the problem even harder to solve. If you think about that, you know, that's the truth. I'm not talking about being mindless, but put your energy into the place that it should be. See? Energy doesn't belong in problem solving. That only makes it hard.
I was watching something last night, almost paraphrasing that, and it was a speaker that was a bit of a cliche speaker by the numbers, but he said, energy flows where attention goes. So if you're there talking about, I don't want to be fat, I don't want to be fat, I don't want to be fat, where's your energy going? Into that. So yeah.
All right, look, I'll just sum up about how to structure your outcome, how I structure my outcome. And there are questions I need to ask when I'm working with a desired outcome. The first one is, what do I want? Right, we've dealt with that. What do you want? Outcomes, if we're talking about internal dialogue, ought to be expressed in the positive. This is nothing to do with positive thinking. Right? And positive thinking worries me. It always makes me think these people don't believe it, you know, and they're just trying to convince themselves. This is not about positive thinking as such. You know, I see poor people who come along here with sometimes very, very serious, life-threatening things, and they'll say, oh, I'm trying to be positive about this. You know? Well, we're dealing with your future and my future, we're talking about tonight. And it's not a matter of trying to be positive. Just couch your inner dialogue in positive terms. Positive here, in the way I'm using it, simply means directed towards. So if you've got your outcome, if you know what you want, then your internal dialogue, your statements, even if they're external, need to be directed towards. This old guy, Mick Rowe, very famous in that part of the world for manufacturing and retail stores, they had a lot of them. And he absolutely dismissed me with his first statement. But, you know, you can call it desperation or whatever you like. I had a family to feed. I needed to have something that I could get my hands on that would produce some money for my family. So I wasn't put off by the fact that, no, we haven't got any need for any salesmen. I offered him something for nothing. If you've got some stock you can't move, I'll sell it for you. And I did. Because I believed in myself. I believed in my ability. I wasn't stupid. I went to a town that was going to be flooded and they'd made a new town. So there's bound to be people who want things there. I just happened to think about it because I heard about it and put it into action. So, when you ask what do I want, you don't say what don't I want. You don't say what should I avoid. You keep that positive, the meaning of positive, directed towards the goal that you have. A nice way to switch it around, some people have difficulty of turning negatives into positives, but use the word instead. What do I want instead of what I've got? What do I want instead of what I've got? All right, I'll abbreviate now. I'm not even going to get on to beliefs, but hugs there, not my turn. Obviously some outcomes are more important than others, aren't they? And I'm 76, nearly 77. I'm about to be 77. So...
Good year. Good year.
That's when you were born.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't know what people of 20 or 30 or 35 think about somebody being that age, but I promise you, I've got goals. I promise you that I prefer that I tip over right here sometime in the future rather than be sitting at home in a rocking chair or enjoying retirement. Because you're alive until you're not. And to fill out that life.
Hope it's not today.
All right, let me tell you this one, and then I'll shut up. Hugs are huge, unbelievably great goals. So we have different goals. I told you, but you know, a goal. I'm in theological college. I had a goal. Wow, that's long gone. Long gone. But I have other goals. I have other goals. Some of them are really large. Some are not so big. But I promise you, I know what I want. And that's the secret. Knowing what you want. I apologise for speaking so long. I honestly didn't realise that I was doing that. Are there any questions before we break, and then we'll go and have a cup of something or other?
How was the time? What is it? What do we got?
It's 20 to 8.
22. Okay. So say 20 minutes.
Yes, yeah, all right, we'll break for 20 minutes if there's no questions. There's coffee, tea, biscuits and what have you out there. Please help yourself.
Or whatever they feel necessary. Of your comments on what I do. And Q&A. You were in a trance, mate.
I didn't hear what you said. Oh, I didn't hear either. I thought you were studiously cogitating. Just pull the flap down. That's it. Just put it on to... I don't know what that said.
Oh, that's on fan only at the moment. So if you want it on cold, James, just turn it around 3 or 4 clicks. Next one. Next one. And then adjust the thermostat accordingly. Probably where it's at's not bad, probably.
Yeah, that's cool it down for a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't know it wasn't on.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was just a band.
Have you got a business card?
I thought that on the way. I thought, geez, I've only got my Povo business card, but they'll do the job if anyone asks. So yeah.
Yes, so I'll type that out for you and then I'll email it to you.
Business changing.
Yeah. Okay, that's all right.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, let's catch up and have a yarn about it. And if it's,
Well, you can just do that one page.
I love it. I love curiosity.
Can you suggest that you would prospect or bloke in the house or at some meeting and you needed to record notes of action for you or for someone else to do fill out a form for someone else to process. And you could do it with a pen that recorded your pen strokes and then transmitted the information instantly through your mobile phone for someone else to action.
Right, okay. Yeah. So it's received in some sort of electronic format.
And actually has a calendar.
Right. Okay.
Pen strokes. If it's a form that pulls the fields of which then edited the other end.
Right.
So the government has a pen store. Email. You can use the original customer.
I love it. There'd be guys like me who'd right up, that's going to save me a step. Great. Yeah, there'll be techno phones, and there'll be some that'll say, if that's the latest doohickey, I need, because I've had a few guys like that when mobile internet first came. I remember one of the guys, he got the Bluetooth printer, he could sign up the listing and upload it to realestate.com on the spot. They could sign the document electronically on the whatever pad of the, I mean, I don't even know some of the stuff he did, but some of the guys loved that stuff, and some of the old school guys would run a million miles, but saw it was the niche, and if enough like it, it's a viable product, absolutely.
If you did.
And it would be enough. Yeah, absolutely.